Hi, I'm Dr. Stephen Brownlow. I'd like to talk a little bit about development. When we think about development, there's a lot of different kinds of development. There's cognitive development, there's social development, there's moral development, there's spiritual development, there's self-development, there's interpersonal development, our ability to form relationship with others, and all of those seem to grow kind of together. The people who have kind of tried to tie this together and how this works, like Ken Wilber, for instance, notice that cognitive development seems to be a stage or two in front of the others. And so people like Wilber think, well, okay, so it's cognitive development that must be the driving engine, and everything else kind of comes along to keep up with it. That you can't grow anything faster than you can grow your cognition. And I think that's true. But it leaves out another important point. The first person who really was the expert on cognitive development ever was a Swiss biologist named Jean Piaget. And Piaget, what he noticed in looking at cognitive development was that the constraining variable with cognitive development was actually emotional development. That if you know anything about Piaget talked about 4 stages: sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. Psychologists have since come along and found there's at least a stage or 2 past formal operations that they've identified. But what Piaget had noted was that if, for instance, you are in the pre-operational stage emotionally, you can't develop past the concrete operational stage intellectually. It's one stage ahead. If you start to get to formal operations, either your emotional development has to catch up a stage, or your cognitive development is going to slam back down again to concrete operations until you do. So the upshot, I guess, is if you're looking at a life that's full of suffering, that's not really where you want it to be, your relationships aren't where you want it to be, your health maybe isn't where you want it to be, you're not thinking as clearly as you want to, you don't seem to be able to keep up with other people intellectually, the thing that's holding you back is almost certainly your emotional development. And I'm going to say that you can change that. And there's a path that people follow as they develop emotionally. And there are techniques that will get you from one stage to another emotionally. And that emotional development actually corresponds very similarly to cognitive development. There's the same kinds of places, same kinds of stages. And I want to talk about that in a minute and how that works. But before I do that, I want to talk just briefly about your autonomic nervous system. Now, if you know anything about the nervous system, I mean, there's the central nervous system, which we all know about through brain and your spinal cord, and there's a peripheral nervous system, which kind of is all the nerves that come out to your skin and stuff like this. There's also something called the autonomic nervous system. Some people, kind of thinking they're joking, call it the automatic nervous system. But what the autonomic nervous system does is all the stuff that we do automatically, that we do without thinking. Okay, so we breathe, our heart beats, our food digests, our body temperature is regulated, our immune system functions, our body repairs itself from wounds and injuries and and just the wear and tear of daily life. And the autonomic nervous system is what does all of that. Now, there's actually two branches of the autonomic nervous system, which you might have heard a little bit about. One is called the sympathetic nervous system, and that's what gets us up. It gets our heart beating, and it gets us ready to compete or deal with challenges or deal with threats. And then there's the other side, which is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is what slows us down. It helps us relax. And that's when we digest our food and repair our body, and the immune system kind of kicks in and takes over and strengthens itself, and those kinds of things. Now, typically, the way we're designed is we wake up in the morning and the sympathetic nervous system kind of kicks in real early, and we get up and we do things, and we run races and gather food, and we do all of this kind of stuff. We go to work and we come home and we settle down and we relax. We're with our families. Everything is peaceful, and we kind of bliss out, and things just do what they're supposed to do. Our body starts repairing itself, and we go to sleep at night, and our body finishes the job of repairing itself. Now, that's the way the human body's designed to work, and for a long time it sort of did. Obviously, if the tiger didn't kill you, when you were in the cave, you did that most of the time. Current culture doesn't work that way. Right now, we do an awful lot of things that keep our sympathetic nervous system going. And so there's a lot of fight flight involved in that. We stress ourselves out, and we never get enough parasympathetic stuff going on. And so you hear a lot of advice on how to relax. You should relax, you should meditate, you should go to spas, you should do all this stuff. You need to kick up the parasympathetic because you overdo the sympathetic. You overdo the fight or flight. All of that's true. And if you read that, you think, well, this parasympathetic is just this great thing. We just need more of it. The problem is that we have too much sympathetic. There's a complication. And the complication is really pointed out. It's been pointed out by Stephen Porges in polyvagal theory, which is the idea that there's actually a third thing. Besides fight or flight, there's also freeze. And what freeze is about is that there's a system in all of this where if the threat is so big that fight or flight won't work, then you don't have any more sympathetic. What it does is it just shuts off the sympathetic nervous system, and you go full on parasympathetic, and you can't do anything. Now, if you think about the lion coming up and sniffing around at you, if you run, you're probably going to get eaten, but at least you feel like you can do something. If you try to fight the lion, you may not succeed, but at least you feel like you're doing something. If you're just standing there and letting the lion sniff around at you and waiting to see if the lion is going to eat you, that's terrifying. Now, the reason I bring all of this up is that our emotions, the early ones, the very most basic ones, the ones that keep us stuck in the pre-operational sphere, are primarily freeze-oriented emotions and not fear. So let me explain what I mean by that. All your whole life, you have had times that you were with your parents, they loved you, you loved them. Something would happen, and maybe you tried to do something, you thought you had done something great, and mom scolded you, and you were 2 years old, and you thought, well, gosh, I thought she loved this, I thought she loved me. But and you cried because it didn't feel good, but it's okay. You didn't put any real meaning to it because 2-year-olds don't have the ability to really put meaning to things yet. They're not cognitively developed enough. But there was a day when you were probably about 3.5 years old that all of a sudden your frontal cortex started working and the parts of your brain that sort of understand the difference between you and the world outside you started working, and you realized, holy crap, the reason I feel terrible was because she scolded me because I did something bad. And I didn't even realize it was bad. What's wrong with me? There's something wrong with me. And so we get this feeling when we're about 3.5 that, oh my God, this whole time I've been feeling bad and not knowing what it was about. It's because people don't love me because there's something wrong with me. We call that shame. And at 3.5, you start noticing that. You start putting meaning to all these bad feelings. And shame is sort of the quintessential freeze emotion. There are others: guilt, apathy, hatred, envy, regret, remorse, grief. All of those are very much freeze emotions. You don't do anything about them. You just sit and stew in them. They feel very victim-like. And those are what we first learn when we're about 3.5. They're early pre-operational emotions. But then we might, and a lot of times we do, we develop later pre-operational emotions, which are sympathetic emotions. And what the sympathetic emotions allow us to do is not feel so crummy, but what they also do is they stress us out terribly. And so what a sympathetic emotion might look like is something like anger or craving experience. And those experiences could be anything from listening to a song we like, to watching a TV show, to going to a concert, to using drugs or drinking, or any kind of experience that we think something out there is going to make me feel good in here. So we have that. We have pride. Pride is a terrible emotion, I'm going to say, because what pride does is it convinces us that we're better than all this. We don't have to do anything anymore, that we've got things set. And if you look at where the world is, the people who run most of the terrible parts of the world are stuck in pride. And I'm talking about everything from petty dictators in third world countries to televangelical preachers are stuck in pride, and they think they know everything and you are clearly beneath them, and they can puff up their chest and they don't have to change because the will of God is on their side, for instance. And so what happens in the pre-operational arena is we typically bounce between parasympathetic things that feel like crap and sympathetic things that don't feel like crap as much, but everybody else feels like crap around us because we're abusing drugs or being angry or being prideful and ordering them around or something. And all of that is faulty. And then there's a jump from there where we start to balance those two. And at first, that balance is kind of a seesaw. One goes up, one goes down. We're like this. And eventually they get closer and closer and closer and closer until they're kind of in sync. And that is concrete operational stage. And the first emotion like that we encounter is courage. And there's a few others. There's courage, there's trust, there's hope, there's acceptance. And those are really the concrete operational stage. And then the formal operational stage is thinking, it's logic, it's flow. But the post-formal stages go past linear logic. And the first emotion that we find there is love. And as we go further and further and we get more and more synchronized, we not only we start realizing at some point that it's not about our bodies. Our bodies are just reflections of what we're attaching to. And as we become more and more embodiments of love and we attach more and more to that, we realize that all this other stuff is fake. Everything that went before it was fake. All of that, just like you can't measure darkness. Darkness isn't real. Light is real. Okay? Falsehood's not real. Truth is real. Falsehood's just the absence of truth. Darkness is just the absence of light. So you can't measure darkness. You can't measure falsehood. Something is true or it's not. Something has light or it doesn't. And it has a certain amount of light. It has a certain amount of truth. But with emotions, things have a certain amount of love, or they have very little. So shame, it's not a presence of shame. Shame is an almost complete absence of love. And so all of those pre-operational emotions are an absence of love. So then the question is, how do you move past that absence of love? How does that happen? And I'm going to say there are steps and stages to doing that. And there's no shortcuts. But if you know what you're doing, if you know how to do it, you can do it much faster. Usually what we look at is, well, okay, it's going to take time. And with a young kid, it takes a long time. But the reason it takes a long time is because they're immature. And it takes a long time to develop the cognitive, the neurological basis for their development. It doesn't take that long for a grown person to develop neurology they already have. And so the question then is, what are the stages? What is it that we're trying to do? And that, my friends, is why I've invented this program. So wherever you are in that, whether you are stuck in shame, whether you're stuck in hope, whether you've made it to love, there is a stage past that and a stage past that. And I aim to help you get to that stage. So read down below and make a decision. What kind of a life do you want to lead? Thank you.